the war drums are beating strong. We're seeing gold close above 1900 today, oil on the rise. What does this all mean for your bank account? What does this all mean for your investments? And probably more importantly, what does this mean for everyday life if we continue to see oil moving in this way, the war drums beating, and in all likelihood, probably a new round of money printing? We're going to be discussing that with my good friend Steve Penny today. He's the creator of Silver Chartist. It's the best free newsletter out there covering gold, silver, commodities, and making sense of this crazy time that we're in. And more importantly, Steve, what I love about Steve is he's focusing not on just let me kill you with bad news, but what can we do about it? What are the ways that we can protect and preserve our own purchasing power and create more financial independence? Steve's class act, become one of my good friends, and his free newsletter is fantastic. So I highly recommend checking that out. As always, I'll link it pinned as the top comment and in the description right there down below. So I recommend you check that out in the link below. Make sure that you smash the like button, subscribe, bell notification. Shout out to our sponsor, Vizsla Silver, one of our favorite silver and gold mining stocks, now on the New York Stock Exchange as well. So thank you, Vizsla Silver. And give me a comment down below. Steve Rules right there down below. It's good to see you, Steve.
Hey, brother. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Pretty weird times. Like I told you, just got back a couple hours ago. My grandmother's on the verge of passing away. So just got back from there. I didn't tell you, but my wife's pregnant with number 2 right now. So she's about 3 weeks pregnant.
Well, really sorry to hear about your grandma, but congrats on the new baby on the way. That's awesome. Really happy for you guys.
Yeah, weird times, right? Like oil price is getting at. I mean, closing in $100 a barrel, probably see 200 pretty soon. I mean, especially if these war drums keep escalating, of course, we're going to see that. Let's just start off with, how do you make sense of this whole news timeline that's taking place? Some say market crash, then they say interest rate rising. Obviously, that's not going to happen especially if they're planning for war. What do you make sense of all this taking place right now?
Well, it could go a lot of different directions with that, but it is a full-time job keeping up with everything. I'm at my computer all day long, tracking these things, watching the charts, and it's hard for even me to keep up with everything. But I like price and volume overlaid on a chart to show me what the markets are, how they're digesting this information. But I think from a big picture perspective, the things we're starting to see the things that you and I have been talking about for a long time now. They're just starting to happen. And unfortunately, I think these trends are only going to continue to accelerate as time goes on, with a lot of volatility in both directions along the way. And I was thinking back, over the last few years, it was just a couple of years ago, the Fed was talking about there is no inflation. Then they had to acknowledge, hey, inflation is transitory. Like, don't worry about it. Now they're acknowledging that inflation is here, but don't worry, we're going to fight it. We're going to get ahead of the curve by raising rates. That's not going to happen. And I think probably the next thing to look for as inflation continues to run away, even though we may see a little bit of easing, it's going to continue to accelerate. The next thing they're going to start doing is blaming businesses, blaming corporations, blaming businesses for jacking up prices, which is going to create just more class warfare. And unfortunately, the supply disruptions that are seeing now, I think we're going to continue to see the inflation we're seeing, the geopolitical unrest, all of these things. I hate to be a bearer of bad news. Like you said, I'm an optimist. We can make good out of these situations, but unfortunately, from the big picture, what's happening in the world is not much happy to report on.
Yeah, well, they already are blaming businesses. I mean, We've got Biden's press secretary and Elizabeth Warren have both blamed inflation on the greedy food suppliers. And I think that, looking at that, it kind of also seems to me that it sets the stage for price controls. But one of the questions that nobody asked them is, if the reason that vegetables and meat and everything is higher in price, and it's because of the greedy food suppliers in America, why did Germany have Germany just noted 25% year over year increase um, in their price index, the highest since 1949. So, Steve, tell me why you're seeing it everywhere if it's just the greedy suppliers of food in America.
Well, it just takes the slightest bit of independent thinking and critical thought to come to the conclusion that the mainstream narrative is wrong. But unfortunately, so many people in today's world don't have that ability to think for themselves or think critically. So they just mindlessly believe what the mainstream media tells them. So a lot of people do believe this narrative, but obviously that's not true. Anyone who can think for themselves knows that's not true. And rather than focus on the problems, as me and you like to talk about, there's a lot of things we can do to not only prepare for it, but to use this volatility to our advantage. Inflation is not a good thing. It impoverishes the poor and further enriches the people who have assets. But wealth is transferred during inflation. Wealth is also transferred during deflation. But understanding where we are in the economic cycle and the business cycle, you can position yourself to be on the receiving end of that transfer. And that's, I know, what you and I like to focus on. That's the optimist side.
Where do you think we are in the cycle, especially given the trending events, talk of war, etc.? Where are we in this cycle you just alluded to?
Well, there's so many different cycles, right? You have the war cycle, the civil unrest cycle, the economic cycle, and there's a book called The Fourth Turning by Strauss, and the other guy's name is slipping my mind. But what's interesting is they wrote this book decades ago, and they talk about how all of these cycles converge right in the early 2020s. And sure enough, we're seeing that happening. And the last time all these cycles converged was back around like the Revolutionary War. So how you handle those and where we are. My focus is the economic cycle. That's my specialty. So obviously, inflation is the main narrative around the financial markets right now, and I think there's still a little bit of. I think general market participants are beginning to recognize that the Fed is behind the curve. They're not going to get ahead of the inflation curve by raising rates nominally. For example, right now, the latest inflation data was showing 7.5%. Let's say they get nominal interest rates up to 3 or 4%. They're really aggressive, quote unquote. Well, that's still negative real rates. The inflation rate is going to be higher than the nominal interest rate. And that's negative real rates, which is fuel for gold. And we're seeing the price of gold finally beginning to reflect that. If you go back to last year, 2021, every time we saw hot inflation numbers come out, gold sold off. Why? Because the general market participants thought, oh, well, nothing to worry about. That just means the Fed's going to jack rates up and get ahead of inflation. I think people are starting to slowly realize that's not going to happen. And this move in silver and gold, I think we're in the early stages of this. We're just starting to curl up off of some big important bases that were formed. That doesn't mean we're going to go straight up. Gold has had a quick move here in the last few weeks. So a little bit of backing and filling here would not be surprising. But I think we're going to see higher highs and higher lows going forward. And I think we are seeing a trend reversal in the precious metals.
Do you buy the war narrative, or do you think that it's just a distraction from everything else is going on, or do you think that it's a real possibility?
Yeah. So last week, when the headlines really started being pumped out about this war narrative, I was at my computer watching the intraday markets, and gold had already begun moving before the war drums really started beating. But when those headlines came out, that did accelerate the move. So I think the primary driver here is inflation and the financial markets. But the war drums kind of just accelerated it a little bit. And I'm always skeptical of moves that are driven by geopolitical events, because often what happens is, those rallies get sold off as soon as the tensions ease even the slightest. But I think the primary narrative here in gold is inflation and negative real interest rates.
So what you're saying is, regardless of whether the Fed raises rates or claims they're going to raise rates, the reality is you're saying that you think the fact that negative real rates are actually setting in is going to be the next move forward in precious metals.
Yeah, let's lay out my tentative baseline roadmap for gold going into for the rest of 2022. Historically, at the beginning of rate hike cycles, what happens typically is gold sells off before the first rate hike. And then right when they do that first rate hike, that usually signals a bottom within a few days. We saw that in 2015, in December of 2015. They finally did their first rate hike. Well, like 3 or 4 days later, gold bottomed at $1,045, and it went on a big rally for the next few months after that, as the Fed was raising rates. Saw the same thing in 2004 to 2007. Gold rallied in the face of rising nominal interest rates. So that's usually a bullish catalyst for gold. But so I think we're going to turn a corner here and gradually start climbing higher. But I think the really big move happens when the Fed inevitably reverses course, when they abandon this whole rate hike cycle and say, hey, you know what, we got to go back to quantitative easing and easy money. They may call it something different, but that's when we see, the really big move towards $50 silver, $3,000 gold, and maybe even beyond that.
I think maybe they'll call it like the Putin stiff arm package or something like that. Like they'll probably blame it on him for everything. Now, what do you make of the? Obviously, we got to leave out some of the details because I've already received a few spankings from the community guidelines. But in terms of things we've talked about before, which is essentially leaving the system, right? You've talked about bank bail-ins and freezing of accounts. You've talked about that a lot. And one of the weird things is, most people would say interesting, but not going to happen in the Western countries. That happens in third world banana republics, but we're seeing that in the third world, formerly known as in Truckistan, formerly known as Canada, the freezing of accounts. And I want to know what you think of that in relation to what you've talked about a lot in regards to leaving the system. Because when I saw that, that was what I thought of. Wow, Steve and a lot of my guests have talked a lot about the money in your bank isn't yours. And whether it's a bank bail-in, whether it's a wrong think or what have you, your money is a sitting duck in many instances. I watched a clip of Jordan Peterson yesterday, who claimed he was told by some high-level military officers that said, get all of your money out of the Canadian banks immediately. This is a lot worse than you think. And I just wanted you to touch on that.
Yeah, 100%. That's just another reason, as if we need more reasons to own physical metal stored outside of the banking system. When I think of physical metal, I'm not thinking about getting rich, although I do think it will increase your purchasing power, physical silver, physical gold. But primarily, it's an insurance policy. And if you've ever been on the fence about, maybe I don't need physical gold, I'll just go, invest in the mining stocks. Watch what's happening in Canada right now. And you can bet your bottom dollar, there's a lot of high net worth individuals in Canada who never even thought about investing in physical gold, who are now looking, where do I put my money? I don't feel safe. And maybe they even thought about Bitcoin. And I'm not anti-Bitcoin, but they're even saying they're going after the crypto wallets. And I understand there's ways to protect that and everything, but just that's even a target. You can bet there's a lot of high net worth people saying, I want some physical gold right now. And I just heard Bill Holter doing an interview yesterday saying the premiums over in Canada right now are through the roof. And, that's just a sign of things to come really around the world, not just the West, but certainly the United States. So there's going to come a point where you're going to want physical metal. I'm highly certain of that. Every single one of us is going to have a point. I want some metal. And if you already have some, you're probably going to want more. But having none, there's going to come a point where you can't get it. Imagine living in Venezuela right now and you want to get some physical metal. Good luck. You're not going to be able to. Maybe if you're a multi-millionaire and you have some back channels, but you're not going to walk down to the coin shop and get some silver and gold. So the time to start preparing for these things is to own it before you need it. Just like fire insurance. You don't buy fire insurance when you see the flames over the hill. You buy it before there's even a whiff of fire. And Jake, you're on mute.
One of the interesting things about watching that is, what you said is any person with especially high net worth individuals, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you fall on, it becomes increasingly obvious that your money, your net worth parked in the bank can easily become not yours anymore, or an absolute liability. I was reading that they turned over the information from the CEO of Coinbase to the Ottawa Police Department. Um, and it makes you go, wow, you know, these conversations that we've had where there's a percentage of people that say it's alarmist, you're starting to see how much the world is going to change, in that if you don't have a percentage of your capital outside of the system, it may or may not be bailed in or frozen, but you're certainly taking on a higher risk than you would have ordinarily thought, right?
Yeah, 100%. Like think about this. A lot of people, maybe you're not too tuned in with the truckers, or you never thought about sending them money or whatever. But imagine you said, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to send $25 to one of these truckers and buy them lunch because you," and to a peaceful protester. Maybe there's some people out there causing problems, but 99.9% of them seem to be very peaceful. Hey, I'm going to buy one of these guys lunch. You send them $25, and now all of a sudden they come and confiscate your bank account. I mean, this is crazy. This is nuts to be happening in a Western country, in Canada. Who would have ever thought this was going to happen in Canada? And just because it's not happening here in the United States, don't think it can't. It certainly can. If it can happen in Canada, it can happen in the United States. It can happen in Australia. It can happen anywhere.
Yeah, it's a playbook that is being rolled out. And so I wonder, where do you think it goes from here? Um, whether it's war talks, whether it's freezing people's financial assets, whether it's inflation, supply chain disruptions. What do you think's next?
Well, I guess my mind goes to things don't move in a straight line, although the pace of change is accelerating. So unfortunately, as far on the war front, the geopolitical front, I see things escalating. This is a major conflict with I don't see any solution. It's not about all the things they say in the headline news. My perspective as someone who studies the petro-dollar system, it's about pipelines. I call it pipeline politics. Who can supply energy, natural gas to Europe? Is it going to be through these pipelines that come up through the Middle East or from Russia? And what happens to be the gateway into Russia from those two places is Ukraine. Coincidence, now Ukraine is the center of the geopolitical, focus. But as far as where things go, there's a very good chance things de-escalate in the short term, and then people forget about it, and then it rises up again. And eventually, I think there's probably going to be some, kinetic warfare, unfortunately, and probably we're headed towards more major conflicts in the years ahead. I'm not sure that's going to happen like tomorrow or next week. I could see this de-escalating in the short term and then kind of accelerating again.
So let's talk about pipeline politics. You and I have talked about the petro-dollar system before. How does this play into everything that's happening?
Okay, and this can be a sensitive issue for a lot of people because it offends people's politics. And you and I don't do politics, so we can talk about it. But if you're listening to this, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I'm an independent thinker. I'm not biased by any of that. But the majority of our foreign policy is driven by, I call it the petrodollar system or pipeline politics. And right now, OPEC sells their oil in dollars. And that was negotiated by Henry Kissinger back in, I think, 1973, the early 70s, when we came off a gold standard. And that gives us the world reserve currency. The rest of the world needs dollars. Why? So they can buy oil from OPEC. And anything that threatens that system is going to create major geopolitical conflict. The last few people who tried to do that, Libya with Gaddafi, and I'm not saying that guy's a good guy or anything, but he was trying to do this gold-backed dinar and sell his oil in something other than dollars. Same with Saddam Hussein before the first Iraq war. For a while there, they were actually selling their oil in euros. That lasted a couple of months. And then the first thing we did when we took that country back is we're selling that oil back in dollars. So that's kind of like the main driver I see of geopolitics is energy policy, what those energy units are sold in, what currency they're sold in. And, obviously Russia and China are not happy with the current setup. They want that exorbitant privilege. So I think this is what we're seeing here from a big picture perspective is three world superpowers vying for who's going to control the next 100 years.
And Russia's new pipeline threatens the petrodollar system.
Well, they want to export their natural gas to Europe, and they probably don't want to use U.S. dollars. In fact, I know they don't. They don't want to sell it in U.S. dollars. So I think that's probably the overarching thing. There's other cross currents. I'm not saying that's the only factor there, but I think
we're not saying that, but we're talking in regards to this pipeline politics and as it relates to the strength of the U.S. dollar and thus how that influences gold.
Yes, exactly. So zooming out from from a financial aspect, if you can imagine a day where OPEC stops selling its oil in dollars and they go with something else, the dollar is going to lose half its value probably overnight. I'm not saying that's going to happen imminently, but I think over the next coming years, we can see the trend away from where power is shifting. So all that to say, the strength of the U.S. dollar has a lot of headwinds facing it, and the idea that it's going to be the world reserve currency forever, that we're going to enjoy this exorbitant privilege for the next 10, 20 years is very unlikely in my opinion.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch Russia talk about. I mean, one, they've entered the conversation of legalizing Bitcoin, and two, they've talked about how they're not afraid of sanctions. They obviously have some cards in their pocket with whether that's that they're planning to trade oil for Bitcoin or whatever it is. I mean, they obviously are aware of the impending sanctions, and that'll be interesting to see how that influences the petrodollar system, because as you've stated, that's really at this point what protects the hegemony of the US dollar system, right?
Yep, 100%.
Now, how does gold fare in a war, or even if it's not war, in a high foreign conflict environment like this?
Well, historically, it does very well. And if these things were to happen, where OPEC or some other nation stop selling their energy or their oil in dollars, I mean, that's going to be highly, highly inflationary. So you're going to want inflation hedges. But what's interesting too is these countries, we're talking about Russia and China, they're buying physical gold hand over fist, just as the big banks are, just as JP Morgan is. So everyone knows the saying, follow the money and follow the smart money. I don't think these people are stupid. And we see high net worth individuals doing the same thing. They may not go on CNBC and talk about it, but a lot of these talking heads we see on CNBC are buying physical metal as well. So I like to say follow the money, and they're accumulating physical metal, and I think we should be doing the same.
I had a guest, I forget who it was, but they were talking about how all of the sanctions that have been brought up against Russia, whether you agree with them or not, that's not the scope of the conversation, but he was talking about how it's actually strengthened their balance sheet because, they have no debt. And now as a result of that, they have a lot of, they obviously, they own a lot of Bitcoin, that's for sure. We know that they own gold. And so they've set themselves up with a lot of alternative assets. It'll be interesting to see if they do proceed with their pipeline and selling gas outside of dollars, how that influences OPEC nations, which might just be waiting for another domino to happen to give them the green light to do the same thing.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's a great question to ask. And, I bring up the topic. In the past, I've done tons of research on this, but it's not something I keep up with on a day-to-day basis. But the overarching narrative is that this is a trend that's in motion, and it's probably not going to reverse, and it's highly inflationary, and it all bodes as just another reason to own physical metal.
And why is it inflationary? What happens if there's there obviously is a threat to the petrodollar system, but if the threat escalates and becomes a real issue for the dollar-based power structure, why is it highly inflationary? And what happens in a scenario where the petrodollar system is threatened?
Yep. Okay, this is a really good question. So the U.S. federal government spends a certain amount of money each year, right? And they take in roughly $4 trillion in taxes. Well, they spend a lot more than they take in taxes. So they have to do what's called deficit spending. And that's when the Federal Reserve does treasury auctions um, to, to fund that deficit. Well, who funds it? The Federal Reserve is the buyer of last resort. So they create currency out of thin air to buy those treasuries. But the second biggest buyer is foreign countries. Think Saudi Arabia, think China, even people who are not friendly to us. Well, why are they funding our deficits? Why are they lending us money? Because they need the US dollars to go buy oil from OPEC. That's a major reason. So if that system were to stop, what are they going to fund our deficits for? They don't need those dollars to go buy oil. So who's going to fill in the gap? Who's going to fill in that gap? The answer is obvious. It's the Federal Reserve. They're going to print even more money to fill those deficits, which is obviously highly inflationary. And this is where all this is headed over time. I mean, this isn't like a next week thing. This is over the next few years and rest of the
So then you have a huge surplus in dollars, but no demand from it, from these foreign entities, because if that were to occur, then they're no longer using dollars to buy oil. Thus, you have all this surplus dollars, and then the Fed has to print even more. So then you have this highly inflationary environment with little or no demand for dollars, basically. Is that right?
Exactly, because the U.S. government cannot live within its means. It would just be impossible, even if they tried to. So they have to borrow a ton of money every year. So we need lenders, and if no one wants to lend us money, that just leaves the Fed to print it, and that's what they're going to do. That's where all this is headed. And you come to a point, like I'm talking the end game eventually, where like the interest on the national debt consumes all of the federal tax receipts, and then that makes interest rates go up. And then the Fed is going to have to print even more and even more, and it creates an inflationary spiral that ends in hyperinflation. The
And
alternative,
that's how you have a currency collapse.
yeah. So that's the alternative is you try and live within your means now and try and fix this problem now. But the political cost of doing that, I mean, it would be so draconian. I mean, it would require telling Social Security recipients, Medicare recipients, pensioners, military pensions. Think of all the things the government does. I mean, massive cuts to all of that. We can't even reduce the rate of spending, let alone make actual cuts. So that's just not politically viable. So it's really going to be interesting to see how all this plays out. I mean, it's going to be inflationary, no doubt. But I mean, there's going to be just violent volatility in the years ahead as all of this kind of resolves itself. But that's the dilemma they're in.
Interesting. It helps make a lot more sense of it. You can see how it ties into the macro conversation that you and I have had on this channel for a long time, how what's going on with Russia, what's going on with China, what's going on with Ukraine, how it all ties into this larger, as you mentioned many times, an impending collapse of currency. And in many ways, it's possible that this posturing by the United States is because they're trying to slow down the rate at which dollars become more worthless, right?
Yeah. So what the Fed is trying to do, they call it financial repression. And that's where you have inflation run hot, because inflation helps who? It helps lenders, and it helps borrowers, and it hurts lenders. Well, who's the biggest borrower in the world? It's the U.S. government. So they want to gradually inflate that debt away as much as they can without it running out of control. They call that financial repression. But the problem has become so big that I can't see how that can possibly work. And there are better people who can articulate this macro thesis than me. But I think a takeaway is just having a grounding in these things allows you to, one, stomach the volatility. Like when silver goes down to 21 and change, it doesn't bother me at all because I know where this is headed. Problems have solutions. Predicaments have managed outcomes. And this is a predicament because there's no solution. This is where it's all headed. So, volatility in silver and gold doesn't really bother me. And, having that fundamental conviction can allow you to stomach volatility.
Interesting. Yeah, it's enlightening. It helps me make sense of it all. Like, because I was like, why are they doing this? I was like, is it to distract from whatever is going on domestically? But it makes a lot more sense when you talk about the petro-dollar system and the consequences of if a big supplier of energy like Russia finishes its pipeline and is selling energy outside of the US dollar system, the consequences of that, as you suggested, are essentially catastrophic in regards to a currency collapse. Now, let's talk about what can we do about it? What are the ways to prepare? I know you've got silver chartists, you've got your own strategy. So let's bring it over to what can we control.
Yeah. So number one is to have a strategy. A lot of people, maybe they wake up to all of this, what's going on in the world. Maybe they don't fully understand it, but they know things are things are messed up and we're headed in a bad direction. And they say, I want some silver and gold and some hard assets and I want a strategy. Well, they just start buying gold. They hear someone on Twitter talk about a mining stock. Oh, I'll get that one. I think that's okay, but you can do so much better by having a well-defined, personalized strategy. And for me, like I dollar cost average into physical metal every single month. I don't care what the price is. I'm just trading fiat for money. With mining stocks, I've got a very specific selection criteria for the stocks I want to own. And then I have a strategy for accumulating them. I also have a specific strategy for when to sell them. And then I like to personally short-term trade. That's not for everyone, but I've got a specific strategy for that. So, that's kind of my strategy in a nutshell. That doesn't mean it's the right strategy for you, but even thinking about these things is a good first step.
Now, I know you also were mentioning to me you've got some exciting stuff going on at Silver Chartist. I know there's a lot of people listening that are subscribers, and then there's some that aren't. But give us an idea of some of the cool happenings you got going on.
Yeah, we're thinking long term with Silver Chartist. It's really accelerated beyond my wildest dreams. It's been around less than a year and a half, and we're up to like 40,000 free and paid members over that actually, which is I'm humbled and honored to be able to share my information with people and to be sharpened by theirs as well. But one thing that I found frustrating is Twitter, Facebook, those kind of social media outlets. They can be great for connecting with people, but I don't like using Twitter. I don't like Twitter or any of these other things. So we were searching for alternatives and what platform to use. Should we switch to Discord? And maybe that one's not so bad. But what we're going to do is we're going to create our own, our own community. And it'll be kind of a hybrid of Twitter, of Facebook, and a blog post where like-minded people within our community can come together in a safe place that's not owned by some third party. And we can respectfully share ideas and sharpen each other in a nice controlled environment that's, not controlled by some third party. And, we'll also share our content, but it's also a great way for community to develop. And we're super excited about this. And that's what's coming in the next couple of months for Silver Chartist members.
Awesome. So that's going to be an app.
Some people don't want to download an app, but yes, there will be an app on your phone, on your iPad, on your Android, whatever. And you can get push notifications. You can customize it how you want to receive information. You get a daily email summary of all the things that happened on the feed that day. Or you can just go to the website too. Just like Twitter, you can go to twitter.com, or you can have the app. It'll be the same kind of thing with Silver Chartist. So we're super excited about that. We just got to work on it today. And it's going to take a month or so, but let's call it a couple months to give myself a buffer. But we're actively doing that. And I think that's something that's going to really be a huge value add for our community.
Very cool. So for everyone listening, if you guys want to check that out, the free Silver Chartist newsletter is linked, as I said at the beginning, pinned to the comments and in the description right there down below. And if you are a member, sounds like some great new happenings coming up here soon as well. Steve, any last ways you want to leave it?
No, man, I think we covered a lot today, and hopefully I didn't sound, like irritated or angry about that stuff, but I get fired up about these things because it hurts. All these things we're talking about are hurting the poor and middle class, and it enriches the wealthy, and it's not right, but we can use it to our advantage. So I appreciate you having such an open mind and, sharing truth with people and helping people. I know what you've done here in the last couple of years or so has really helped a lot of people. So grateful that you keep inviting me back.
Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. It helps me understand it a lot better. If you're listening today, give us a comment right there down below. Let us know what you think of today's episode. Make sure you smash the like button on this video, subscribe, bell notifications will notifies you for new videos. Even if you're already subscribed, double check you hit the bell notification. Be sure to check out Steve's free Silver Chartist newsletter, pin in the comments in the description. Thanks to Vizsla Silver, our mining stock sponsor, Vizsla Silver. And Steve, it was great to catch up with you.
You bet. Thanks, brother.